The pick fell from my fingers as the spotlight hit. 300 people went dead silent. 6 months after the crash that shattered my hand, I stood paralyzed on stage, unable to play a single chord. "We're waiting, Jackson," Mike whispered from behind his drums. Blood pounded in my ears. The pain seared through my wrist to my shoulder, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. I was Nashville's rising guitar virtuoso just months ago. Now, a cripple staring at an instrument I could barely hold. This comeback was a mistake. The crowd's silence turned to whispers, then murmurs. I was drowning. "Music isn't in your hands, son. It's in your soul." My mentor Charlie's last words to me before cancer took him. I gritted my teeth, shifted the guitar, and pressed my damaged hand to the strings. No more lightning-fast finger-picking. Instead, something raw emerged, primitive, wounded, but alive. This is the story of how I died on stage that night, and how something new was born from the wreckage. 6 months earlier, Nashville had been my playground. At 32, I was finally breaking through after 15 years of hustling. My band, Broken Compass, had just signed with a respected indie label, and my reputation as one of the most innovative guitarists in the alternative country scene was growing. Our tracks were getting radio play, and bigger venues were calling. Critics were using phrases like technical virtuosity and revolutionary finger-picking style to describe my playing. That April evening was like any other. I was driving home from a late-night recording session, windows down, the warm Tennessee air washing over me. Our new album was nearly complete, and it was shaping up to be our breakthrough. The streets were nearly empty at 2 a.m. as I crossed the Cumberland River. I never saw the truck that ran the red light. They told me later that the driver had fallen asleep. All I remember is the flash of headlights, the sickening crunch of metal, and then darkness. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital with my right arm in a complicated apparatus of metal and pins. The surgeon was straightforward when she visited during rounds. "Multiple fractures to the radius, ulna, and several bones in your wrist and hand," she said, her voice clinical but not unkind. "We've done our best, Mr. Reed, but I need to be honest with you. The nerve damage is extensive. You'll regain basic function with therapy, but the kind of fine motor control required for professional guitar playing." She paused, searching for words that wouldn't destroy me. "It's unlikely to fully return." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't process them. Wouldn't. "There must be something else you can do," I said, my voice raspy from the breathing tube they'd removed the day before. "Surgery, therapy, something experimental. I don't care what it costs." She shook her head. "We'll continue with the best therapies available, but I don't want to give you false hope. Your hand will improve, but it may never be what it was." After she left, I stared at the ceiling for hours. My right hand, my life, was destroyed. What was a guitarist who couldn't play? What was I without my music? The next few weeks passed in a blur of pain medication, depression, and anger. My bandmates visited, awkwardly trying to be supportive while secretly wondering if they should start looking for my replacement. Our label representative called with concerned platitudes that thinly veiled his real question. Could they still salvage the album? My girlfriend Leah was steadfast at first, bringing me books and takeout food from my favorite places, telling me we'd get through this. But I pushed her away with my bitterness until her visits became shorter and less frequent. Physical therapy started 6 weeks after the accident. By then, the external fixator had been removed, replaced by a less intrusive brace. The pain had subsided from excruciating to merely constant, but the real torture was psychological. Each small movement I couldn't execute was a reminder of what I'd lost. My therapist, Marcus, was relentlessly positive in a way that made me want to scream. "Great progress today, Jackson," he'd say after I managed to pick up a marble, something a toddler could do without thought. I used to be able to play Raining Blood by Slayer at full speed. I snapped one day. "Now you're congratulating me for squeezing a foam ball. Don't patronize me." To his credit, Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm not comparing you to Slayer. I'm comparing you to the guy who came in here last week who couldn't hold that ball at all." It was a fair point, but it didn't ease the ache in my chest. Small victories meant nothing when I'd lost the war. 3 months after the accident, I moved back to my small East Nashville apartment. The advance from our label was dwindling rapidly, eaten up by medical bills that my insurance didn't fully cover. I hadn't touched a guitar since the accident, couldn't bear to look at the case leaning in the corner of my bedroom. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I spent days watching mindless TV, ordering delivery food, and ignoring calls from friends and bandmates. When I did venture out, I avoided the bars and venues where I'd once performed. The thought of running into other musicians, having to explain, seeing the pity in their eyes, it was unbearable. It was during this low period that Charlie Green re-entered my life. Charlie had been my first guitar teacher when I was a gangly 15-year-old with calloused fingers and big dreams. He'd retired from teaching years ago, but we'd kept in sporadic touch. He'd been a session musician in his prime, playing on countless records in the 70s and 80s that most people had heard without knowing his name. He showed up at my door unannounced, a six-pack of craft beer in one hand and a battered acoustic guitar case in the other. "Your mother called me," he said when I opened the door, looking surprised. "Said you might need a visitor who wasn't going to tiptoe around you." I let him in reluctantly. He wasn't wrong. Everyone else was treating me like I was made of glass. Charlie surveyed my apartment, taking in the unwashed dishes, the takeout containers, the general air of abandonment. He nodded as if confirming something to himself, set down the beer and guitar case, and started cleaning up without asking permission. "I don't need a housekeeper," I protested weakly. "No, you need a swift kick in the ass," he replied, continuing to collect empty pizza boxes. "But we'll start with dishes." I found myself helping him, embarrassed by the state of my home now that I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. We worked in silence for 20 minutes before sitting down with the beers he'd brought. "So," he said finally, "you gonna tell me you're done? That this isn't for Jackson Reed?" I stared at the label on my beer bottle. "You know what happened to my hand?" "I do." "Then you know I can't play anymore." "Not like before." Charlie took a long drink. "Did I ever tell you about Django Reinhardt?" I rolled my eyes. "Yes, the jazz guitarist who lost the use of two fingers in a fire. Everyone brings him up. It's not the same." "No? Why not?" "Because he was a genius who invented an entirely new way of playing." I trailed off. "Just what? Just a run-of-the-mill guitarist who was being called one of the most innovative players in Nashville? That kind of ordinary." I had no answer for that. Charlie leaned forward. "Look, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's possible. Django didn't become great despite his injury. In some ways, he became great because of it. It forced him to find a new voice. I've spent my entire life developing my technique," I said. 15 years of practice, of building muscle memory that's now worthless." "Your technique isn't who you are," Charlie countered. "Your musicality, your ear, your soul. That's what made you special. The hands were just the tools." He reached for the guitar case he'd brought, opening it to reveal an old Gibson acoustic. "I don't want to," I said quickly. "I'm not asking you to play." He pulled out the guitar and placed it on his own lap. "I'm asking you to listen." Charlie began to play, and despite everything, I felt myself being drawn in. His technique had always been impeccable, but tonight he was playing with a simple, emotional quality that transcended technique. It was a song I recognized, an old folk tune I'd learned as a beginner. When he finished, he held the guitar out to me. "Your turn." "Charlie, I can't. Not the way you used to. Try a different way." My hands were trembling as I took the instrument. The weight of it felt simultaneously foreign and deeply familiar. I positioned it awkwardly on my lap, my right hand hovering over the strings. "I can't pick like before," I said, feeling the limitations of my damaged hand. "So don't pick. Strum, or tap, or find another way entirely." Tentatively, I placed my damaged hand on the strings and made a simple strumming motion. The chord was uneven, clumsy, nothing like the precision I'd once commanded. "That's awful," I muttered. "It's a beginning," Charlie corrected. "You're thinking about what you lost instead of what you still have. You have music in you, Jackson. It doesn't care how it gets out." I handed the guitar back. "I'll think about it." Charlie left the guitar when he departed. It sat on my couch for 3 days before I worked up the courage to touch it again. When I finally did, I spent an hour just reacquainting myself with the feel of it against my body. The frustration was immense. My right hand could manage basic strumming, but anything more complex sent pain shooting up my arm. But something had shifted. Instead of comparing myself to what I had been, I started from zero. Complete beginner. I found that while my right hand was severely limited, my left hand, the fretting hand, was still strong and dexterous. I could create complex chord shapes with my left while keeping the right hand work simple. I began to experiment with alternate tunings that would allow me to play interesting harmonies with minimal right-hand movement. I developed a technique that combined simple strumming with left-hand hammer-ons and pull-offs. It was different, less technical, more atmospheric. But it was music. Progress was agonizingly slow. I'd spend hours working on techniques that I would have previously mastered in minutes. Some days the pain was too intense to play at all. But for the first time since the accident, I had direction. I started physical therapy again, this time with renewed purpose. Marcus noticed the change immediately. "You've been practicing something," he said as I worked through an exercise to improve my grip strength. I picked up my guitar again. His face broke into a genuine smile. "That's fantastic, Jackson. How does it feel?" "Horrible," I admitted, but also right. The next few months were a slow climb out of darkness. I developed a new routine: mornings for physical therapy exercises, afternoons for guitar practice, evenings for listening to music I'd never paid attention to before, ambient, experimental, genres that focused on sound and texture rather than technical prowess. Charlie visited regularly, offering guidance, pushing me when I needed pushing, and occasionally bringing his musician friends to jam with me. The first few sessions were humiliating. I could barely keep up with the simplest progressions, but gradually I found my new voice. I also reconnected with my former bandmates. Mike, our drummer, was the first to reach out, inviting me to sit in on a recording session for what would have been our album. They'd recruited a new guitarist, a young kid named Tyler with impressive chops. I watched him play parts I'd written with a mix of pride and heartache. After the session, Mike and I grabbed beers at a quiet bar away from the usual musician haunts. "Tyler's good," I said, meaning it. "Yeah," Mike agreed. "But he's not you." "I'm not me anymore either," I replied. Mike studied me for a moment. "I heard you've been playing again. Different style." I nodded, still figuring it out. "It's not what it was." "Maybe that's not a bad thing." He took a sip of his beer. "The label's been asking about you. They're interested in what you're doing now." I nearly choked on my drink. "Why?" "I can barely play basic chords." "Because you're Jackson Reed, and you have a story. Plus, Charlie's been talking you up to everyone who'll listen." The idea seemed absurd, but a small spark of hope ignited in my chest. 5 months after the accident, I recorded a simple demo with Charlie's help. 3 original songs in my new style, sparse, atmospheric, with vocals that were more prominent than they'd ever been in my previous work. I sent it to our label without expectations. Their response was cautiously optimistic. They heard potential in the new direction, though they were clear that it was a commercial risk. They offered to fund a small EP for songs to test the waters. The recording process was unlike anything I'd experienced before. In the past, I'd been a perfectionist, doing take after take until every note was precisely as I wanted it. Now, I had to embrace imperfection. My damaged hand would never achieve the clinical precision I'd once commanded. Instead, we focused on capturing feeling, on creating a sonic landscape that complemented my new limitations. Charlie played on 2 tracks, adding guitar parts that I couldn't manage. Rather than feeling like failure, there was something poetic about having my mentor fill in the gaps. Our musical relationship had come full circle. The EP, titled Rewired, was released with minimal promotion. The label wasn't willing to invest heavily in what they saw as an experimental project. Reviews were mixed but intriguing. Several critics noted the dramatic shift in style, comparing it favorably to the later work of musicians who had evolved beyond their technical beginnings to find something more emotionally direct. It was around this time that Charlie was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. The news devastated me. He had become not just my mentor again, but my lifeline, the person who'd pulled me back from the brink when I was ready to give up entirely. "Don't you dare use this as an excuse to spiral," he told me when he shared the diagnosis. "I've got maybe 6 months. I intend to spend them living, not dying. And that includes seeing you get back on stage." I protested. I wasn't ready for live performance. My confidence was still fragile, my new techniques still evolving. "No one's ever ready," Charlie insisted. "You just do it anyway." So it was that I found myself booked to play a short set at the Basement East, a venue I'd played dozens of times in my previous musical life. It was to be part of a benefit show for medical expenses, officially for both Charlie and me, though everyone knew his need was far more urgent than mine. The night before the show, Charlie visited my apartment for what would be our last private lesson. He was gaunt now, the cancer treatments taking their toll, but his eyes still held the same intensity they always had. "You're overthinking it," he said as I practiced the set list. "You're still trying to play like the old Jackson." "I don't know how else to play," I admitted. Charlie took my guitar and played a simple progression, just 3 chords, but with an emotional quality that made them sound rich and complex. "Music isn't in your hands, son," he said, returning the instrument to me. "It's in your soul. Your hands are just how it gets out. Find a different path." The next night, as I sat frozen on stage with 300 expectant faces watching me, Charlie's words echoed in my mind. My damaged hand hovered over the strings, unwilling to produce the awkward sounds I knew would come. But then I looked to the side of the stage where Charlie sat in a wheelchair, nodding encouragement. I shifted the guitar, placing my right hand on the strings in the modified technique we'd developed, and began to play. The sound that emerged wasn't the dazzling fingerwork that had once been my trademark. It was simpler, more sparse, but it carried an emotional weight that my technical playing had sometimes lacked. I closed my eyes and sank into the music, forgetting the audience, forgetting my limitations, just letting the sound flow through me. When I finished the first song, there was a moment of silence, then applause, genuine, encouraging applause. I opened my eyes to see Charlie grinning widely. I played 4 more songs, gaining confidence with each one. For the final number, I invited Charlie on stage. He needed help getting out of the wheelchair, but once seated with a guitar in his hands, the years and illness seemed to fall away from him. We played together, our guitars conversing in a way that transcended technique or physical limitation. It was pure communication, soul to soul. It was the last time Charlie played in public. He died 3 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep. The loss was profound, but it didn't break me as I might have expected. Instead, I channeled the grief into my music, writing a collection of songs that would eventually become my first full solo album, Broken Strings. In the year that followed, my new career took shape. It wasn't the same trajectory I'd been on before the accident. The packed clubs, the technical showmanship, the growing reputation as a guitarist. Instead, I found myself playing smaller, more intimate venues. My audience changed too, fewer musicians coming to study my technique, more listeners connecting with the emotional core of the songs. The most unexpected development came 6 months after Charlie's death. I received an email from a music therapy program at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. They'd heard my story and my new music, and wondered if I'd be interested in working with patients facing similar challenges, musicians dealing with injuries, strokes, or degenerative conditions. My first instinct was to decline. What could I possibly teach others when I was still struggling myself? But then I thought of Charlie, of how he'd seen something in me when all I could see was what I'd lost. I agreed to visit the program. My first session was with a 19-year-old violinist who'd suffered nerve damage in a car accident. The parallels to my own story were unmistakable. She sat with her violin, frustrated tears in her eyes as she tried to execute passages that had once been effortless. "I know exactly how you feel," I told her, and for the first time since my accident, those words weren't a platitude. I truly did understand. I showed her my damaged hand, demonstrated how I'd adapted my playing. "It's not about getting back what you lost," I explained. "It's about discovering what's still possible." Working with her and other musicians in the program became as rewarding as my own performances. I wasn't just sharing techniques. I was offering living proof that there was musical life after injury, that the end of one path didn't mean the end of the journey. 2 years after my accident, I founded the Broken Strings Foundation with the modest royalties from my solo album and contributions from musicians across Nashville. We provided instruments, adaptive equipment, and mentorship to injured musicians and music therapy programs. Charlie's family donated his instrument collection to the foundation, ensuring his legacy would continue to inspire others as it had inspired me. My own playing continued to evolve. While my right hand would never regain its former dexterity, I found that the limitations pushed me to be more innovative, more thoughtful about each note. My new music was more deliberate, more atmospheric, with spaces between notes that I would have previously rushed to fill. Critics began to describe my transformation as a rebirth rather than a comeback, noting that the emotional depth of my new work surpassed the technical brilliance of my earlier career. One reviewer wrote, "Reed's voice as a composer and songwriter has paradoxically been amplified by the very injury that threatened to silence him." The most meaningful validation, however, came from the musicians who reached out to share how my story had affected them, not just those dealing with physical injuries, but anyone who had hit a creative wall or lost their way musically. On the 3rd anniversary of the accident, I played a special show at the Ryman Auditorium, Nashville's most historic venue. I'd played there before as a sideman for bigger acts, but never as the headliner. The show sold out, filled with a mix of old fans and new, musicians and regular music lovers who connected with my journey. As I sat on the stage of the Mother Church of Country Music, I thought about the winding path that had brought me there. The accident that had seemed like the end. The depression that had nearly consumed me. Charlie's intervention. The painful process of relearning and reinvention. I looked down at my damaged right hand, at the scars and the still visible evidence of trauma. Then I placed it on the strings and began to play, not despite the injury, but through it, with it, because of it. The music that flowed from the guitar wasn't perfect in the technical sense, but it was authentic. It was mine. And as I looked out at the faces in the audience, I knew it was enough. More than enough. I still have days when the pain flares up, when I catch myself mourning the guitarist I used to be. But those moments pass more quickly now. I've learned that we are not defined by our limitations, but by how we respond to them. That sometimes, what seems like an ending is really just a different kind of beginning. My name is Jackson Reed. I am a musician. Different than before, but still a musician. Always a musician. And that's enough. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.